The cameras flashed, but they weren't for her. She stood 7 months pregnant at the Harrison Foundation Gala, clutching a glass of water, while her millionaire husband, William Harrison III, wrapped his arm around another woman. In front of all of New York high society, he raised a glass, not to his wife, but to his mistress, publicly humiliating the woman carrying his child. 5 years later, his company is crumbling, and the board is waiting on a new CEO to save them. The elevator doors open, and in walks his new boss. It's her. This isn't just a comeback, it's a takeover. The penthouse at 157 wasn't a home, it was a statement. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike view of Central Park, a sprawling green carpet laid out 80 stories below. But to Catherine Harrison, the view felt like a cage. The glass was cold to the touch, just like the marriage it represented. Everything was glass and steel and shades of grey, a monochrome existence punctuated only by the astronomical price tags of the art on the walls. Catherine, now 7 months pregnant, traced the outline of a brittle, leafless tree in the park below. She was supposed to be happy. She was the wife of William "Will" Harrison III, the charismatic, ruthless heir to the Harrison global logistics empire. Their life was a curated series of press releases, glamorous trips, strategic philanthropic gestures, and now the joyous expectation of an heir. But the reality was silence. Will hadn't touched her, not really touched her, with affection, in months. He was a man of transactions. Their marriage had been a transaction. Her quiet, stable, old money family name, though the money was long gone, for his boisterous, new money empire that needed a veneer of class. The baby, she had hoped, would be the one thing that was real, the one thing that was theirs. She heard the whisper of the private elevator arriving. Will was home. He strode into the vast living room, loosening the dark silk tie of his bespoke Tom Ford suit. He didn't look at her, his gaze already fixed on the tablet in his other hand. "You're home early," Catherine said, her voice soft, hopeful. "Board meeting finished? Davies is still waffling on the Alistair Holdings merger," he muttered, tossing his jacket onto a $50,000 suede chair. "Incompetent fool." He walked to the bar, pouring himself 3 fingers of Macallan 25. "Will, the gala is tonight," she reminded him gently. "The Harrison Foundation event. It's the big one." "I'm aware, Catherine. I'm paying for it." He took a sip, the ice clinking. "Isabella is handling the press. She's sorting out the seating charts." Isabella. The name landed like a stone in Catherine's stomach. Isabella Vance, Will's senior VP of Public Relations, a woman who was all sharp angles, crimson lipstick, and a predatory intelligence. A woman who looked at Catherine not with malice, but with something far worse. Pity. Isabella, who handled everything, who handled Will. "I picked up my dress," Catherine tried again, forcing a smile. "It's a custom Lanvin. They did a beautiful job with the... you know." She gestured to her swollen stomach. "Good. Great." He was scrolling through emails. "Make sure you're ready by 7. The photographers will be there for the entrance. I need this to look good, Catherine. The Alistair board is watching. A stable family image is paramount." A stable family image, not a stable family. "Is Isabella... is she sitting at our table?" Catherine asked, already knowing the answer. "Of course," Will said, not looking up. "She's running the event. I need her nearby in case one of these old money dinosaurs says something stupid to the Wall Street Journal. Don't be difficult, Catherine. You know her role is vital." Catherine nodded, the familiar sting behind her eyes. She had known, for the better part of a year, that Isabella's role extended far beyond public relations. She saw the late-night texts he thought he'd hidden. She smelled the faint, unfamiliar Chanel perfume on his shirts when he came home from late mergers. She saw the way his eyes followed Isabella in the boardroom, a hunger he never, ever directed at his own wife. She had stayed silent for the baby. She believed the baby would change everything. It would anchor Will, make him see what was real, what mattered. The gala tonight, his foundation's biggest event, was supposed to be their night, a celebration of their family, their future. "I'll go get ready," she whispered. Will just grunted in response, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of his tablet. As Catherine walked to their cavernous bedroom, she passed a framed photo on the marble console. It was from their wedding, 3 years ago. Will was smiling, but his eyes were cold, focused on the camera, on the image. She was smiling too, but she was looking at him, desperate for him to look back. She stopped and touched the cold glass of the frame. She felt her son kick, a small, hopeful flutter beneath her heart. "It's okay, little one," she murmured, pressing her hand to her stomach. "Tonight he'll see us. Tonight he'll finally see." But as she zipped up the deep emerald silk of her gown, a chilling premonition settled over her. She wasn't an idiot. She was a woman who had been systematically isolated, made to feel dependent, and gaslighted into believing her suspicions were just hormonal or ungrateful. Tonight wasn't a celebration. It felt like an execution, and she was walking willingly to the gallows, draped in French silk. The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was a sea of glittering diamonds and counterfeit smiles. It was the epitome of New York's philanthropic elite, a place where billionaires wrote checks to cleanse their corporate sins, and socialites competed for the brightest spotlight. Tonight, the spotlight was firmly on the Harrison table. Catherine felt the weight of hundreds of eyes as she walked beside Will. Her pregnancy, once her private hope, now felt like a public vulnerability. She was a ship in full sail, and she felt desperately, dangerously exposed. Will was electric, a king in his element. He gripped her elbow in a gesture that looked like affection to the cameras, but felt like a vice to her. "Smile, Catherine," he hissed, his own smile a brilliant white flash. "You look pale." They reached the head table, and there she was, Isabella Vance, seated directly to Will's right, in a backless, blood-red dress that seemed to suck all the light in the room toward it. She looked like a weapon. "Catherine, you look lovely. So maternal," Isabella purred, her eyes flicking over Catherine's baby bump with a clinical, dismissive air. She rose and gave Catherine an air kiss that smelled of champagne and victory. "Isabella," Catherine replied, forcing her own smile. "The room is beautiful." "Thank you. I micromanaged every detail. Will knows he can count on me to get things done." She shot a look at Will, so intimate it made Catherine's blood run cold. The dinner was a blur of polite conversation. Catherine poked at a seared scallop, the smell making her nauseous. She listened as Will and Isabella dominated the conversation, recounting a genius, hostile takeover in Chicago, finishing each other's sentences. The other guests at the table, a bank CEO, a senator, a tech mogul, watched the interplay, their expressions ranging from amusement to mild embarrassment. Catherine was invisible. She was the brood mare, the placid, smiling accessory. Then it was time for the speeches. Will stood up, tapping his glass for silence. The room quieted instantly. "Thank you all for coming," Will began, his voice reasoning with power and charm. "The Harrison Foundation is proud to support this city's future. We believe in building things that last, legacies, strong foundations." Catherine felt a small swell of pride. This was the man she had tried to love. A company, a legacy, is not built by one man, Will continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. It is built by vision. It is built by tireless dedication. It is built by a partner who sees the world not just for what it is, but for what it can be. Catherine's hand went to her stomach. He was talking about them, about the baby. This last year has been transformative, Will said, his gaze locking on to someone. Not her. His eyes were fixed, with a burning, raw intensity, on Isabella. I have been lucky enough to have a partner who is fearless, brilliant and truly, truly indispensable. A person who has sacrificed everything to stand by my side, to fight the battles with me, to build this empire. The room was silent. Everyone could see where he was looking. Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't happening. So I want to raise my glass, Will said, lifting his champagne flute high. Not just to the foundation, but to the real architect of my success, the woman who is the future of the Harrison brand. He turned, beaming, and held his glass out to Isabella. To Isabella Vance. Isabella stood up, her red dress catching the light. She looked directly at Catherine, her smile a mask of triumph, and then turned back to Will, accepting the toast. The room erupted in confused, polite applause. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment. The millionaire toasting his mistress and his pregnant wife, frozen, staring at them, her face a perfect mask of horror. It was a public execution. He hadn't just admitted to the affair, he had celebrated it. He had declared Isabella his true partner and Catherine a glorified surrogate. Catherine stood up. The scraping of her chair was agonizingly loud. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move. She mumbled, "Excuse me," and walked as quickly and gracefully as she could toward the exit, her hand pressed against her stomach. She made it to the marble-floored corridor before the first sob tore through her. She ducked into a small alcove near the coat check, fighting for air. The click of heels on the marble floor stopped behind her. "You really shouldn't make a scene, Catherine." She turned. It was Will. His face was no longer charming. It was cold, hard, and angry. "How could you?" she whispered, the tears streaming hot on her cheeks. "In front of everyone? Our friends? You're bored? I'm carrying your child." "Don't be naive," he snapped, his voice a low hiss. "You knew what this marriage was. It was a contract. You fulfilled your part of the bargain. You're giving me an heir. But don't ever mistake your role for Isabella's." "My role," she choked out, disbelieving. "You are a placeholder, Catherine. A comfortable, appropriate placeholder. Isabella, she's my equal. She challenges me. She understands what I want. The merger with Alistair Holdings is next week, and I can't have a weak, sentimental woman on my arm. I need a killer. I need her." "So what am I?" Catherine asked, the tears stopping, replaced by a terrifying, icy calm. "What happens to me and the baby?" "You'll be fine," he said dismissively. "You'll have the Harrison name. The child will have a trust fund. You'll be comfortable. But we," he gestured back to the ballroom, "are over. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. My lawyers will be in touch with you. They'll be very generous, as long as you are quiet and cooperative." He adjusted his tuxedo cuffs. "Now, I suggest you go home. My driver is waiting out front. I'm going back to the party. Isabella and I are celebrating." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the cold corridor, the sound of applause and laughter from the ballroom echoing behind him. She looked down at her emerald silk dress, now stained with her tears. He hadn't just left her. He had gutted her, displayed her for parts, and left her to bleed out on the floor of the Plaza Hotel. The last thread of hope she'd been clinging to didn't just break, he had set it on fire. The humiliation was absolute. By morning, the gossip columns were ablaze. "Harrison Ayres Gala Gambit," screamed one headline. "Wife out, mistress in," declared another. The photos were brutal. Will toasting Isabella and Catherine, alone and pregnant, fleeing the ballroom. Will's lawyers descended, as promised. They were not generous. They were sharks. They offered a one-time settlement that was insulting, contingent on her signing a comprehensive NDA that would forbid her from ever speaking about Will, Isabella, or Harrison Global. When she hesitated, still in shock, they became ruthless. They froze her access to their joint accounts. They claimed in a preliminary filing that she was emotionally unstable and a potential risk to the Harrison heir, using her heartbroken flight from the gala as proof. Suddenly, the staff at the penthouse, the driver, the housekeeper, were no longer hers. They were Will's eyes and ears, reporting her every tearful phone call. She was a prisoner in her own home. She was forced to move into a small, sterile apartment, paid for by Will's lawyers on a month-to-month lease, a leash to ensure her compliance. The opulence of 157 was replaced by beige walls and cheap furniture that smelled of particle board and glue. She was alone, 8 months pregnant, and legally gagged. 2 weeks later, she gave birth to her son, Thomas, in a public hospital, alone. She called Will's office to inform him of his son's birth. His secretary informed her that Mr. Harrison was in negotiations in Zurich and would address the matter upon his return. He never called. He never came. He never saw his son. Catherine held her tiny, perfect baby in the sterile hospital room and made a vow. She would not be a victim. She would not be a footnote in William Harrison's biography. Her son would never know this weakness. Her heartbreak, so vast it felt like it would drown her, slowly, painfully, began to crystallize. It hardened from grief into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. A month later, a registered letter arrived at her apartment. It wasn't from Will's lawyers. The return address was in Mayfair, London. She didn't recognize the name, Richard Alistair. She opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter, old-fashioned, written on thick, cream-colored stationery. "My dearest Catherine, you do not know me. I am your mother's brother. We were estranged long before you were born, a family quarrel of no importance now. I have respected that estrangement, perhaps foolishly. I have been following your situation in the press. Your husband, William Harrison III, is the son of a man I despise. The old William Harrison was a thief who built his empire on stolen ideas. I see the apple has not fallen far from the tree. He is trying to merge with my company, Alistair Holdings. He will fail. I, however, have a problem. I am an old man. I am dying, and I have no heir. I have watched you from afar. You have your mother's resilience, but you also have my blood. I cannot let what I have built fall into the hands of vultures like the Harrisons. I am offering you a different life, a life of power. Come to London, you and your son. I will teach you everything I know. I will teach you how to build, how to command, and how to dismantle. I will give you the one thing that woman, Isabella, and your husband truly respect: control. When I am gone, Alistair Holdings will be yours. What you do with it is your own concern. But I suspect we share a mutual interest in seeing the Harrison empire brought to its knees. A car will be waiting outside your apartment building tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you are in it, your new life begins. If you are not, I will not write Again. Your uncle, Richard Alistair Catherine, read the letter 3 times. It was insane. It was a lifeline. It was a weapon. She looked at her son, Thomas, sleeping in a borrowed bassinet. Will had left her with nothing. He had counted on her being weak, broken, and silent. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He hadn't destroyed her. He'd just given her a reason to live. The next morning, Catherine packed 1 small suitcase with clothes for herself and Thomas. She left the insulting divorce papers, unsigned, on the cheap laminate kitchen counter. She left the keys to the apartment. At 10 a.m., a black, unassuming sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a simple dark suit got out and opened the rear door. "Ms. Harrison?" "It's Alistair," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady for the first time in months. "My name is Catherine Alistair." She strapped her son into the car seat, got in, and didn't look back as the car pulled into traffic, heading for the airport. She wasn't fleeing. She was advancing in a new direction. The next 5 years were a brutal, relentless education. London was not a refuge, it was a forge. Richard Alistair was a titan of industry, a cold, brilliant man who saw the world in terms of assets, liabilities, and leverage. He wasn't a warm uncle. He was a mentor, a drill sergeant, and a kingmaker. He adored his grandnephew Thomas, but with Catherine, he was merciless. "You're thinking with your heart, Catherine," he would bark at her during their 6 a.m. breakfast meetings in his Mayfair townhouse. "Your heart is a liability. Your husband counted on that. Do not make the same mistake." She started in the mailroom of Alistair Holdings, a sprawling European logistics and private equity firm. She learned the business from the ground up. She worked 18-hour days, while a nanny, paid for by Richard, cared for Thomas. She earned her MBA at night from the London School of Economics. She learned finance, corporate law, and mergers and acquisitions. She learned how to spot a weakness in a balance sheet from a mile away. The soft, hopeful woman who had cried in the plaza was gone. In her place was Catherine Alistair, CIO. When Richard passed away peacefully 2 years into her training, the board, at his ironclad direction, voted her in as his successor. She was terrifyingly competent. She was cold, precise, and fair. She expanded Alistair Holdings into new markets, her strategies so aggressive they bordered on predatory. She didn't just command respect, she manufactured it. Her London office was the opposite of Will's penthouse. It was warm woods, leather-bound books, and soft lighting. On her desk, there was only one photo, a smiling, 4-year-old Thomas on a pony in the English countryside. Meanwhile, back in New York, Harrison Global was rotting from the inside. Without Catherine's stabilizing influence, and Richard Alistair's company as a potential and now impossible merger, Will's worst instincts had taken over. He and Isabella, whom he had married in a lavish, garish ceremony in Lake Como, were the new king and queen of conspicuous consumption. They bought jets, yachts, and a private island. Isabella's PR budget was a black hole of company funds spent on designer wardrobes, million-dollar parties, and vanity projects. Will, desperate to look like a visionary, made a series of disastrous, high-risk investments in tech startups that imploded. Harrison Global, once a blue-chip behemoth, was now hemorrhaging money. The stock was plummeting. The board was in quiet rebellion. Will and Isabella, blinded by their own arrogance, were scrambling, taking out high-interest loans to cover their losses, leveraging the company's core assets to the hilt. They were desperate for a cash infusion, a buyout, a savior. In her London office, Catherine read the quarterly reports from her New York acquisitions team. Harrison Global was bleeding out. It was vulnerable. It was cheap. "Mr. Grant," she said over the intercom to her chief legal counsel, Mason Grant. Mason walked in, a sharp man in a Savile Row suit. "Ma'am, we're setting up a new shell corporation, Bridgewater Capital. I want it domiciled in Delaware, funded through our Cayman accounts. It's to remain completely anonymous." "Anonymous acquisition, hostile or friendly?" Mason asked. "It will begin as friendly," Catherine said, her eyes fixed on the New York skyline on her monitor. "I want you to make a tender offer for a controlling stake in Harrison Global. They're desperate, so they'll see it as a rescue. Will Harrison is too arrogant to believe anyone would mount a hostile takeover and too stupid to see who's really behind it." "He'll fight it," Mason warned. "Let him," Catherine said, a small, cold smile touching her lips for the first time in years. "He'll leverage himself even further. Let him panic. Let him rally the board. And when he's exhausted all his options, Bridgewater Capital will go hostile. We'll buy their debt. We'll buy their outstanding stock. We will buy him." "Understood. And when the acquisition is complete?" Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out over the grey London rain. "When it's complete, you will schedule an emergency board meeting at Harrison Tower. I'll be attending. Personally." The boardroom on the 50th floor of Harrison Tower was thick with the smell of old money and new panic. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the board members. William Harrison III paced at the head of the table, his face slick with sweat, his usual bravado cracked and flaking. Isabella Harrison sat at his right, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. Her flawless mask of makeup couldn't hide the frantic energy in her eyes. "This is an ambush!" Will shouted, slamming his hand on the table. This Bridgewater Capital, it's a vulture fund. They came in pretending to be a partner, and they've spent the last 6 weeks buying our debt, poaching our shareholders. It's a hostile takeover, plain and simple. A takeover you allowed, Will," said Michael Davies, the oldest board member, his voice dry as paper. "You leveraged the company to the brink to cover your expansion projects. This board warned you. You are the one who put the for sale sign on our front door." "We can fight this," Isabella interjected, her voice a little too sharp. "We can file an injunction. We can—" "You can do nothing, Mrs. Harrison," Mason Grant said, standing by the door. He was the only calm person in the room. The sale was finalized. As of 9 a.m., Bridgewater Capital acquired a 51% controlling stake in Harrison Global. The new owner has called this meeting. Will stopped pacing. "Owner? Who? Who is it? Who's behind this? I'll double their offer. The main boardroom doors slid open with a heavy, expensive whoosh. All heads turned. First, 2 associates from Mason Grant's law firm walked in, carrying briefcases. Then, Mason stepped aside, and she walked in. Catherine Alistair. She was not the woman they remembered. The soft, mousy wife was gone. This woman was sculpted from steel. She wore a bespoke navy blue power suit that was severe and elegant. Her hair, once a gentle brown, was a sleek, dark chestnut, pulled back in a chignon that highlighted the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She radiated an aura of absolute, untouchable control. The room went tomb silent. Will's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared as if he'd seen a ghost. Isabella's crimson-painted lips parted in a silent, "Oh." She recognized the look of a predator. Catherine walked slowly, deliberately, to the head of the table. She placed her leather satchel down, not on the chair beside Will, but on the chair at the head of the table. Will's chair. She looked at him. Her expression was not angry. It was not hateful. It was not even satisfied. It was neutral, the way one might look at a piece of furniture that was in the way. "You're in my seat, Will," she said. Her voice was quiet, with a clipped transatlantic accent honed in London. Will just stared, sputtering. "Catherine, what is this? What are you doing here?" "She's here," Mason Grant announced, as the sole proprietor and CEO of Bridgewater Capital, which, as you know, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Alistair Holdings. Catherine finally turned her gaze to the stunned board. "Good morning, gentlemen. And Ms. Chen," she nodded to the one other woman. "I am Catherine Alistair, the CEO of Alistair Holdings, and as of 9:01 a.m., I am the majority shareholder and new chairwoman of Harrison Global." The blood drained from Will's face. He physically staggered back, gripping the table for support. No, that's impossible. Richard Alistair hated me. He's dead. He was my uncle, Catherine said simply, as if stating the weather. And he was a very smart man. He left his company to family. Now, if you'll all please take your seats. We have a lot to discuss. Isabella found her voice first. "You bitch," she hissed. "This is what? Some kind of pathetic revenge fantasy?" Catherine looked at Isabella, truly looked at her, for the first time. She tilted her head, a scientist examining a microbe. "Revenge? Mrs. Harrison, this is a corporate restructuring. Harrison Global is a failing company with bloated executive leadership and catastrophic debt. I am here to fix it. This isn't personal, it's just business." She turned to the board, who were watching this with a mixture of terror and awe. "My first act as chairwoman," Catherine continued, her voice crisp, "is to announce a full, external and forensic audit of the last 5 years of executive expenses, all PR and marketing budgets, and all private travel." Isabella's face went from red to a ghostly white. "My second act," Catherine said, "is to schedule immediate performance reviews for all senior executive staff. My team will be handling them." She looked at Will. "We'll start with your division, Will. I believe you're head of acquisitions. We should discuss those failed tech startups." Will was shaking. "You can't. This is my company. My father." "Your father's company," Catherine corrected him, "is now my company. You are, as of this moment, an employee. And frankly, Mr. Harrison, your performance has been deeply unsatisfactory. Mr. Davies, please move. I believe Mr. Harrison needs to sit down." She took her place at the head of the table. The king was dead. Long live the Queen. The audit was not a review. It was an autopsy. Catherine's team of forensic accountants, led by Mason Grant, descended on the executive floor of Harrison Global like a wolf pack. They were not interested in spreadsheets. They were interested in receipts, travel manifests, and offshore bank accounts. Within 72 hours, they found what Catherine already knew was there. The rot was concentrated in 2 places: Will's catastrophic high-risk investments, which he'd hidden from the board, and Isabella's PR budget. Isabella hadn't just been spending lavishly, she had been committing wire fraud. She had created shell companies, fake event planners, consulting firms, and influencer agencies, and had been awarding them 7-figure contracts from the Harrison Global marketing budget. The money was then funneled directly to a private account in her name. She had stolen, by their initial estimate, over $22 million. Catherine sat in her new office, Will's old office, which she'd had completely redecorated in warm woods and soft greys, removing the garish chrome and black leather, when Mason Grant brought her the final report. "It's worse than we thought," Mason said, placing the thick binder on her desk. "It's not just embezzlement. It's tax evasion, wire fraud. She's creative." "And Mr. Harrison?" Catherine asked, flipping to the executive summary. "Willfully ignorant at best, complicit at worst," Mason replied. He co-signed on 3 of the largest contracts to the shell companies. He may not have known where the money was going, but he's on the hook for gross negligence. The board has grounds to terminate him with cause. No severance, no parachute. No, Catherine said. Mason looked surprised. Mum? Firing him is an escape. He'd take his remaining personal wealth, lick his wounds, and disappear to some private island. He doesn't get to escape, Catherine said, her voice devoid of emotion. His humiliation must be as public as mine was. He stays. He'll keep his title, but I'm reassigning him. She picked up the phone. Send Mrs. Harrison in, please. Isabella stormed into the office moments later. The last 3 days of the audit had clearly worn on her. She was no longer the sleek predator. She looked ragged, desperate. You have to call them off, Isabella shrieked, advancing on the desk. This is harassment. You have no right to. Sit down, Isabella, Catherine said, her voice quiet, but carrying an authority that stopped Isabella cold. Isabella, shocked at her own compliance, sank into one of the chairs facing the desk. Catherine slid the binder across the polished wood. My audit team has found some discrepancies in your PR budget. Isabella's eyes widened as she saw the cover page. Forensic audit. I. Vance, executive expenses. This is $22 million, Isabella, Catherine said. Vance Innovations, Global Style Consultants, Apex Event Management, all shell companies, all registered to a post office box in the Cayman Islands, all controlled by you. Isabella's breath hitched. She was trapped. You can't prove that, she whispered. I don't have to, Catherine said, leaning back. The district attorney's office will. Mr. Grant has already forwarded this entire file to the SEC and the Manhattan DA. They found it compelling. Isabella's entire body began to tremble. You're sending me to jail. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, pathetic terror. Catherine, please, don't do this. He made me. He pushed me. The spending, the lifestyle. He's the one you want. Catherine watched her, her face unreadable. You did this to yourself. You were a thief, a clumsy one at that. You saw an opportunity, and you took it, and you never once thought there would be consequences. That's the problem with people like you and Will. You think you're untouchable. Catherine pressed a button on her desk phone. Sarah, please send in security. No! Isabella lunged forward, trying to grab the binder. Please, Catherine, I'll give it back. I'll give it all back. Don't do this. Think of what we... There is no we, Catherine said, as 2 uniformed security guards entered the office. There is only you and what you did. You can't! Isabella screamed as the guards took her by the arms. Will, do something! The guards escorted the screaming, struggling woman out of the office and into the main hallway in front of the entire executive floor. Employees poked their heads out of offices, watching as Isabella Harrison, the Queen of Harrison Global, was marched to the elevator in handcuffs. Catherine stood and walked to her window, watching the silent, snow-filled sky over Central Park. An hour later, her assistant buzzed. Mr. Harrison is here to see you. He seems unwell. Send him in. Will stumbled into the office. He was a broken man. His suit was rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot. He had clearly been watching from the sidelines as his wife was arrested. They took her, he whispered, slumping into the chair Isabella had just vacated. They arrested her, Catherine, in the lobby. The press was there. How did the press get there? I sent a release, Catherine said, sipping her tea. A proactive statement about the company's new leadership taking a zero-tolerance policy on executive fraud. Will stared at her, the reality of his situation finally dawning. He wasn't her partner. He wasn't her equal. He wasn't even her enemy. He was just collateral damage. "What do you want?" he begged, his voice cracking. "My money. The house. It's yours. Just call them. Tell them it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. You can fix this." "I am not fixing this, Will. I am cleaning it. She stole from my company. She's a criminal. And you," Catherine said, her gaze hardening, "are an idiot. You signed off on it. You were so blinded by your own arrogance and so desperate to maintain your lavish lifestyle that you didn't even bother to read what you were signing. So fire me," he yelled, a pathetic attempt at his old bravado. "Fire me, ruin me, get it over with." "Fire you?" Catherine almost laughed. "No, Will, you're not getting off that easy. As of tomorrow, you are being reassigned." "Reassigned? To where?" "Harrison Global owns a number of subsidiaries, including," she pulled up a file on her computer, "a 20,000-square-foot warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn. It's our legacy document storage facility. It's where we send all our paper files from before 2005. It's cold, it's damp, and the Wi-Fi is terrible." Will's face went white. "A warehouse? You will be the director of legacy archives. Your job will be to digitally scan and catalogue 3 decades of shipping manifests. You will report to the head of logistics, a Mr. Peterson, who, I believe, you demoted 5 years ago. You will keep your salary. You will keep your title. But you will spend the rest of your career in a concrete box, looking at paper. You wanted to build a legacy, Will. Now you get to archive one." He couldn't speak. It was a sentence worse than firing. It was erasure. She was making him invisible, just as he had done to her. "Get out of my office, Mr. Harrison," Catherine said, turning back to her computer. "You have a long commute tomorrow." 6 months passed. Harrison Global, under Catherine's leadership, was being rebuilt. She had restructured the debt, sold off the toxic assets, including the jet, the yacht, and the private island, and infused the company with Alistair's cutting-edge logistics technology. The stock was stable and beginning to climb. The board, once terrified of her, now worshipped her. Will Harrison had vanished. He was a ghost within his own company. He did as he was told, driving his modest sedan from his now empty penthouse, which was on the market, as he could no longer afford the maintenance, to the cold warehouse in Red Hook. He spent his days in a windowless room, the click of the industrial scanner the only sound. He was a laughingstock, the man who had everything, reduced to a file clerk by the wife he'd thrown away. He had tried, twice, to resign. Both times, Catherine's legal team had reminded him that his employment contract had a 5-year non-compete clause, which she intended to enforce. If he quit, he couldn't work in logistics, the only industry he knew anywhere in North America. He was trapped. One evening, Catherine was working late, finalizing a new merger. Her assistant had long since gone home. The only light on the 50th floor was from her office. There was a knock. She looked up. Will was standing in the doorway. She hadn't seen him in months. He was thin, pale, and looked 20 years older. His expensive suit hung off him. "They won't let me up here," he said, his voice raspy. "I had to use the fire stairs. I have to talk to you." Catherine looked at him for a long moment, then nodded to the chair. "You have 2 minutes." He sat down, his hands trembling. "Isabella, she's taking a plea. 10 years. They're taking everything." "That is the consequence of her actions," Catherine said. I know. He swallowed, looking at the floor. I get it, okay? You win. You won. You took the company. You ruined me. You ruined her. You've had your revenge. It's done. I told you, Will, this was never revenge. This was a hostile takeover. You were a bad investment. You were incompetent, and you were running this company into the ground. I saved it." "No," he said, looking up, his eyes suddenly burning with a new, different kind. "This is a new, different kind of pain. This is revenge. Be honest, just once. This was all for what I did to you, at the gala, with the baby." Catherine was silent. "The baby," he whispered. "Our son. Catherine, I want to see him." Catherine's face, which had been a mask of corporate ice, finally changed. The neutrality vanished, replaced by a slow-burning, Arctic fury that was more terrifying than any rage. "You want to see him?" she repeated. "Yes, he's my son. My heir. I have a right." "A right?" Catherine stood up, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "You have no rights. You lost them when you sent your secretary to tell me you were in Zurich. You lost them when you never called, never visited, and never once asked if he was alive. You lost them when you tried to leave me, your pregnant wife, with nothing, calling me unstable in a court of law to try and take him from me. I was angry. Isabella. You were you," Catherine snapped. "That was all you. He doesn't have a father. He has an uncle who taught his mother how to be strong. He has a name, Thomas Alistair. My name, Alistair. You took my name from him?" "You took your name from him," she said, walking around the desk to stand in front of him. "You don't get to claim him now, Will. Not because you're broken, not because you're lonely, not because your mistress is in prison and you have nothing left. He is not your consolation prize." Will finally broke. He slumped forward, his face in his hands, and began to sob. Gut-wrenching, pathetic sounds of a man who had truly, finally, lost everything. Catherine watched him for a full minute, her expression cold. She remembered crying like that, alone in a cheap apartment, while he was celebrating with Isabella. "This is the final transaction, Will," she said. He looked up, his face a mess. "What? I am buying you out?" She tossed a file onto the desk. "This is a severance agreement. I'm waiving your non-compete clause. In exchange, you will sign this. It terminates your parental rights to Thomas. Officially, legally, forever." You want me to sell my son?" he choked out. "You already did," Catherine said. "You sold him for a newer model, for a few more years of arrogance. This is just the paperwork. Sign it, and you are free. I'll buy your remaining, worthless stock options at yesterday's market price. It's enough for you to disappear. Go to Monaco, or Singapore. Start over. Or don't, I don't care. But you will never, ever contact me or my son again." Will stared at the paper. His signature. For his son. He picked up the pen. He was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He looked at Catherine, searching for one last flicker of the woman he'd married. He found nothing. Only the CEO. He signed the paper. "Get out," Catherine said. He stood up, a hollowed-out man, and walked out of her office for the last time. Catherine Alistair stood at her window, looking out at the glittering lights of her city. She was alone, but she was not lonely. She was in control. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice instantly warm, all the ice melting away. "Yes, I'm just leaving the office. Of course I'll be home in time to read you a story. I love you, Thomas." She hung up, grabbed her coat, and walked out of the dark, silent office. The signed confession of William Harrison's ultimate failure sitting alone on her desk. The fluorescent lights of the JFK International Terminal at 2:30 a.m. were a merciless, buzzing yellow. William Harrison III sat at Gate 42, his flight to Singapore delayed by an hour. He was just a man in a rumpled, off-the-rack suit, his face pale and puffy. He held a styrofoam cup of bitter, cold coffee. The severance agreement had been wired. It was a substantial sum, enough to live on, but it was finite. It was the last money he would ever earn from the company his grandfather had built. He was invisible. No one looked at him twice. He was no longer William Harrison III, the Lion of Wall Street. He was just another piece of human freight waiting to be shipped off. He watched a young family nearby. A father, looking exhausted but happy, was hoisting a sleeping little girl onto his shoulder, while his son, about Thomas's age, buzzed around his legs with a toy airplane. The man ruffled his son's hair. "Easy, champ. We'll be on the plane soon." A cold, sharp pain lanced through Will's chest, so intense it made him gasp. It wasn't the loss of the company. It wasn't the loss of his penthouse or his reputation. It was that. The casual, easy affection. The word champ. He had a son. A son he had sold for a non-compete clause. He had spent 5 years trying to build an empire for a child he'd never seen, all while destroying the woman who was raising him. He'd been so obsessed with his legacy that he had failed to see he already had one. He'd traded a human being for a balance sheet, and he'd lost both. When they called his flight, he stood up, dropped his coffee cup in the bin, and walked down the jet bridge without looking back. He had no one to look back for. 200 miles away, in a sprawling, warm duplex overlooking Central Park, a different building, one she had chosen, one she owned. Catherine Alistair was on the floor, building a fortress out of magnetic tiles. "And the dragon can't get in," her 5-year-old son Thomas declared, placing the last triangular piece on top. "He certainly can't," Catherine said, smiling. "This is the strongest fortress in the entire kingdom. Sir Thomas, you have saved us." This was the real Catherine. The suit was gone, replaced by soft cashmere joggers and a simple t-shirt. Her hair was in a messy ponytail. The office was steel and glass, but her home was plush rugs, overflowing bookshelves, and the faint, sweet smell of baked cookies. On the wall was not cold, abstract art, but a giant, joyful finger painting Thomas had made, framed as if it were a Picasso. She had just finished reading him Where the Wild Things Are, and now it was time for bed. She tucked him into his sheets, which were covered in rocket ships. "Mum?" he asked, his voice small in the dim light of his room. "Yes, my love?" At school today, Leo was showing everyone pictures of his dad. They went to the zoo. He paused, his bright little mind working. "Mom, I don't have a dad, do I?" The ice from the boardroom threatened, for a moment, to creep into her veins. It was the question she had been dreading for a year, the last ghost of William Harrison haunting her son's bedroom. She could lie. She could invent a story about a hero, a traveler, someone who had passed away. But she had rebuilt her life on a foundation of absolute truth. Lies were what Will and Isabella had used. They were weak. She sat on the edge of his bed and took his small hand. "You do have a father, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Everyone does. But your father, he was a man who didn't know how to love. He was a man who made very bad choices. He hurt people. And he hurt me." Thomas's eyes were wide, trying to understand. "Did he hurt me?" "No, he never got the chance," Catherine said, brushing his hair back. "Before you were born, I knew he wouldn't be a good father. He didn't know how to be kind or safe. And my most important job in the whole world, more important than running the company, is to keep you safe. So, I made a choice. I decided it would be just you and me. We would be our own team." And we are, aren't we? The Alistair team, he whispered, a little smile returning. The Alistair team, she confirmed, kissing his forehead. You don't need to worry about him. He's gone, and he can never, ever hurt us. You have me. You have your nanny, Maria. And you have all the love you will ever need, right here. I have enough for 10 fathers. He seemed to accept this, the truth, simple and clean. He hugged her neck tightly. I love you, Mum. You're the boss. I love you, Thomas. Now go to sleep. She watched him for a long time as his breathing evened out. She had defeated Will in the boardroom. She had exiled Isabella to a prison cell. But this, right here, was the real victory. This was the final, definitive act of erasing Will's poison from her life. She had protected her son, not with a fortress of tiles, but with the truth. A month later, Catherine stood at the head of the old Harrison boardroom table. It had been refurbished, the dark, imposing mahogany replaced with a light, warm oak. Thank you all for coming, she said to the board. I have one final piece of restructuring to announce. The board members, including a grateful Michael Davies, whom she had promoted, looked on. For years, this company operated the Harrison Foundation as a vanity project, a PR shield for its CEO's ego. It did nothing. It built nothing. As of today, I am dissolving it. A few murmurs. That was a big move. In its place, Catherine continued, a new energy in her voice. I am pleased to announce the launch of the Alistair Grant program. It will be a real foundation, endowed with $50 million from the company's new profits. She clicked a remote, and an image appeared on the screen. It wasn't a corporate logo. It was a photo of a young, struggling woman holding a baby. The Alistair Grant program, she said, her voice ringing with a passion they had never heard, will be dedicated to providing capital, legal aid, and financial literacy training to single parents, specifically mothers, who are trying to re-enter the workforce or start their own businesses. We will not be a charity. We will be investors. We will invest in the people no one else will, the people who are overlooked, underestimated, and counted out. She looked around the room, making eye contact with every person. I built Alistair Holdings on a simple principle. Find an undervalued, failing asset and rebuild it into something strong, efficient, and powerful. That is exactly what this grant will do. But this time, we won't be investing in broken companies. We'll be investing in broken lives. She looked out the window. It was the same view she had stared at as a prisoner in her own home, 7 months pregnant and terrified. But she wasn't a prisoner anymore. She wasn't just the owner. She was the architect, and she was finally, truly, building something that would last. What a story of betrayal and ultimate triumph, from a publicly humiliated, pregnant wife to the CEO of the very company that cast her out. Catherine Alistair proved that the best revenge isn't just living well, it's a hostile takeover. She didn't just get even, she got everything. What did you think of Will's ultimate fate? Was it too harsh, or did he get exactly what he deserved? And what about Isabella? Let me know in the comments below what your favorite twist in this story was. If you loved this story of justice and revenge, please hit that like button, as it truly helps the channel. Don't forget to share this video with someone else who loves a story where the underdog comes back to run the whole show. And most importantly, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another one of our dramatic, real-life stories. Thanks for listening. He was a titan of industry, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. She was his elegant, intelligent wife, the silent architect of his empire. But in the glittering, hollow world of New York's elite, loyalty is a commodity, and respect is a luxury not everyone can afford. One fateful night, at the city's most prestigious charity gala, under the watchful eyes of the powerful and the privileged, he made a choice. To appease his new flame, a woman draped in diamonds and ambition, he raised his hand to the wife who had built him. A single, sharp slap that echoed louder than the orchestra. He thought it was the end of an argument. He had no idea it was the beginning of his end, because while he slept soundly that night, she was igniting a fire that would burn his entire world to the ground. The Starlight Charity Gala was the apex of the Manhattan social calendar, a glittering spectacle held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, dripped light onto a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet. To the outside world, Damien and Catherine Blackwood were the evening's reigning couple. He, the CEO of Blackwood Innovations, a tech behemoth he'd built from the ground up, was a man carved from ambition and arrogance. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a cold, calculating blue, and his smile a weapon he wielded with practiced ease. Catherine, his wife of 10 years, was his perfect counterpart, or so it seemed. Graceful and poised, with intelligent hazel eyes that saw far more than they let on, she possessed a quiet strength that most people mistook for meekness. She wore an emerald silk gown that shimmered like liquid moonlight, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. She had been the first investor in Damien's dream, not with money, but with intellect. Her Wharton MBA and razor-sharp strategic mind had transformed his raw coding talent into a multi-billion-dollar empire. She had drafted the business plans, navigated the early-stage funding rounds, and architected the corporate structure. He was the face. She was the foundation. A foundation he had begun to treat as little more than pavement to be trod upon. The source of that disrespect was currently clinging to his arm, a vibrant slash of crimson in the muted elegance of the ballroom. Her name was Serafina Munro, a model-turned-influencer whose ambition was as sharp and dangerous as the stilettos on her feet. She laughed a little too loudly, her scarlet lips perpetually curved in a predatory smile. She was everything Catherine was not, ostentatious, demanding, and utterly transparent in her desires. And Damien, a man terrified of losing the status he'd fought so ruthlessly to attain, was utterly captivated by her public performance of adoration. "Darling," Serafina purred, her fingers tracing the lapel of Damien's Tom Ford tuxedo. "Mr. Abernathy from the Times is watching us. We should give him something to write about." She tilted her head towards a corner where several high-profile investors, including the notoriously shrewd Robert Chen of Chen Capital, were in conversation. "Go on, Damien. Remind them who the king of this city is." Damien's chest puffed out. He thrived on such validation. Catherine watched, a familiar ache tightening in her chest. She saw the subtle way he preened under Serafina's gaze, the way he subtly angled his body away from her, his own wife, as if she were a relic of a past he was eager to shed. "In a moment, my dear," Damien said, his eyes scanning the room. "First, I need to ensure everything is perfect." His gaze fell on Catherine. "Catherine, did you confirm the seating arrangement with the event planner? I specifically said I wanted to be at the same table as Senator Thompson." "Yes, Damien," Catherine replied, her voice calm and even, betraying none of her inner turmoil. "We are at table 1, with the Senator and Mrs. Thompson, as you requested. I confirmed it myself, an hour ago. Serafina let out a small, condescending laugh. Always so efficient, aren't we? Like a perfect little assistant. The barb struck its target. Catherine's jaw tightened, but she refused to give Serafina the satisfaction of a reaction. Damien, however, either missed the malice or chose to ignore it. He was too focused on his own performance. For the next hour, Catherine played her role flawlessly. She smiled. She engaged in polite conversation about art auctions and summering in the Hamptons. She deflected intrusive questions about Damien's latest, rumoured acquisition with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. All the while, she was acutely aware of Damien and Serafina, a garish duo moving through the crowd. She saw him whisper in Serafina's ear, saw the possessive hand he placed on the small of her back, a public declaration for all to see. The tension finally snapped later in the evening, near the marbled archway leading to the terrace. Catherine had been speaking with Marcus Thorne, the COO of Blackwood Innovations, and one of the few people who knew the true extent of her contributions to the company. "The quarterly projections are looking aggressive, Catherine," Marcus said, his voice low. "Damien is pushing the R&D department to its limits. I'm worried we're heading for a bubble." "I've seen the data, Marcus," she said quietly. "He's chasing headlines, not sustainable growth. I've warned him." "He doesn't listen to anyone anymore," Marcus lamented, his gaze flicking nervously towards Damien, who was approaching them with Serafina in tow. "What are you two whispering about?" Damien's voice was sharp, laced with suspicion. "Just discussing the quarterly numbers, Damien," Marcus said quickly. Serafina slid her arm around Damien's waist. "Don't let them bore you with business, darling. It's a party." She then looked directly at Catherine, her eyes glittering with malice. "You know, Catherine, you should really try to enjoy yourself. You look so tense. It adds years to your face." Catherine met her gaze, her composure unwavering. "Thank you for your concern, Serafina. But I find that worrying about the health of a $10 billion company is a more productive use of my time than worrying about a few wrinkles." The comeback was swift, precise, and it hit its mark. A flicker of fury crossed Serafina's perfectly made-up face. She turned to Damien, her lower lip trembling theatrically. "Damien, did you hear that? She's insulting me. She's always so cold, so superior." Damien's face darkened. In his mind, Catherine's sharp intellect, once his greatest asset, had become a threat. Her quiet competence felt like a judgment on his loud insecurities. Serafina's manufactured vulnerability was a balm to his fragile ego. He looked from Serafina's pouting face to Catherine's calm, unreadable expression. In front of Marcus, in front of anyone who might be watching from the periphery, he needed to assert his authority. He needed to prove who held the power. "Apologize to her, Catherine," he commanded, his voice low and menacing. Catherine's blood ran cold. "I will not. I have nothing to apologize for." I said, "Apologize." "No, Damien." It was her quiet defiance that broke him. It was the fact that she wasn't cowering. She wasn't afraid. To him it felt like the ultimate betrayal. He saw Serafina looking at him, her eyes wide, waiting. He felt the phantom eyes of the entire New York elite upon him. In that single, terrible moment, his vanity and his cruelty won. He raised his hand. The sound of the slap was sharp, a brutal crack that cut through the murmur of the gala. Catherine's head snapped to the side, the sting blossoming on her cheek like a hot, poisonous flower. A collective gasp rippled through the immediate vicinity. Marcus Thorne froze, his face a mask of horror. For a moment, there was absolute silence, a pocket of stunned disbelief in the heart of the opulent ballroom. Catherine slowly turned her head back to face him. There were no tears in her eyes. There was only a terrifying, crystalline clarity. She looked at Damien, not as her husband, but as a stranger, an enemy. She saw the flicker of shock in his own eyes, as if his hand had acted of its own accord, quickly replaced by a stubborn, defensive glare. She looked at Serafina, who had the decency to look momentarily stunned before a flicker of triumph settled in her eyes. Without a word, Catherine turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't stumble. Her back was straight, her head held high. Each step was deliberate, measured, taking her away from the wreckage of her marriage, through the sea of shocked and whispering faces, and out of the grand ballroom into the cool night air. Damien watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, but he pushed it down. He had made his point. He had asserted his dominance. He turned to a shaken Serafina and forced a smile. "Now, where were we?" he asked, his voice a little too loud, a little too brittle. He had no idea that the sound of that slap was not an ending, but the starting pistol for a war he was utterly unprepared to fight. The taxi ride from the Pierre to their Upper East Side penthouse was a blur of city lights smearing against the cold glass. Catherine sat perfectly still in the back seat, one hand resting in her lap, the other pressed against the lingering, phantom heat on her cheek. The sting had subsided, replaced by a profound and chilling numbness. It was the numbness of a limb that has been severed, the shock preceding the agony. She felt strangely disconnected from the woman in the emerald gown, the woman who had just been publicly humiliated by her own husband. That woman was a character she had played for a decade. Tonight, the performance had ended. When the taxi pulled up to the imposing limestone facade of their building, the doorman, a kind-faced man named George, rushed to open her door. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood. You're home early." His eyes widened slightly as he saw her face, the faint red mark just beginning to bloom on her cheekbone. To his credit, his professional mask didn't slip. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, George. Thank you," she said, her voice a monotone. But as she walked across the marble lobby, she knew nothing would ever be fine again. The private elevator opened directly into their penthouse. It was a monument to Damien's success, a sprawling space of glass, chrome, and minimalist furniture, with a panoramic view of Central Park. It was cold, impersonal, and curated for magazine spreads. It had never felt like a home. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. She walked through the silent, cavernous rooms, her heels clicking an unnervingly loud rhythm on the polished concrete floors. She didn't cry. The time for tears felt 1,000 miles away. What she felt instead was a slow, creeping rage, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It wasn't the wild, screaming rage of a wounded animal. It was the focused, calculating fury of a grandmaster whose opponent has just made a fatal, unforgivable blunder. The slap wasn't the cause, it was the catalyst. It was the physical manifestation of 1,000 smaller betrayals, 1,000,000 moments of being diminished, ignored, and taken for granted. It was the culmination of every time he had taken credit for her ideas, dismissed her concerns as nagging, and paraded his affairs as trophies of his masculine prowess. He hadn't just struck her, he had tried to erase her. She walked into their shared walk-in closet, a space larger than most New York apartments. On one side were Damien's meticulously organized rows of designer suits and shoes. On the other, her own collection of elegant, understated pieces. She ignored them all. She went to the back, to a locked safe, hidden behind a full-length mirror. She keyed in the code, not their anniversary, not his birthday, but the date she had finalized the patent for the core algorithm that had launched Blackwood Innovations. An algorithm she had written. Inside the safe were her personal documents, some jewelry, and a sleek, encrypted hard drive. She took only the hard drive and a single, slim folio of documents. She then walked into the master bedroom and took a small, leather-bound journal from her nightstand. It was filled with her handwriting, notes, ideas, and strategic plans for the company, many of which Damien had later presented as his own. She didn't pack a suitcase full of clothes. That was what a fleeing victim did. She was not a victim. She was a combatant preparing for battle. She took only a single, expensive-looking leather duffel bag. Into it, she placed the hard drive, the journal, the folio, her laptop, and a toiletry bag with only the essentials. The emerald gown she was wearing felt like a costume from another life. She stripped it off, letting it pool on the floor like a shed skin. She changed into a simple, severe black pantsuit, a crisp white silk blouse, and practical, low-heeled Chanel pumps. It was armor. Her phone buzzed. It was Damien. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Texts began to pour in. "Catherine, where are you? We need to talk. You're overreacting." The final one, sent minutes later, was the most telling. "Don't do anything stupid. Think of the company's reputation." His reputation. Not her pain, not their marriage. The company, the entity she had built. A bitter smile touched her lips. Oh, she was thinking of the company. She was thinking of it very, very carefully. She made one phone call. Jessica Riley, a sharp, alert voice, answered on the second ring, despite the late hour. Jessica was her oldest friend, a shark of a divorce lawyer from the prestigious firm of Cromwell, Stern and Vance. The Vance was her father. "Jess, it's me." "Kat, what's wrong? I heard what happened at the gala. My colleague David was there. He called me." "Are you okay?" "He slapped me, Jess. In public." Catherine's voice was steady, devoid of self-pity. There was a pause, and then Jessica's voice turned to steel. "Where are you?" "At the penthouse. I'm leaving now." "Good. Don't engage with him. Don't answer his calls. Where are you going?" "I've booked a suite at the Carlyle, under my maiden name." Vance. The name felt good on her tongue. It was her own. "Okay. I'll meet you there in 40 minutes. We'll start the paperwork." "No," Catherine said firmly. "This isn't about divorce papers. Not yet. That's a skirmish. I'm planning a war." Jessica was silent for a moment, processing. She knew Catherine better than anyone. She knew her friend's calm exterior hid a formidable intellect and an iron will. "Okay," she said slowly. "What's the first move?" "I'm going to need you to look over a non-disclosure agreement. A very, very restrictive one. And I need to get in touch with an old acquaintance. I need you to find the best way to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning. An urgent one." She took a deep breath. "The name is Alexander Sterling, of Sterling Capital." Jessica let out a low whistle. Alexander Sterling was a legend on Wall Street, a so-called vulture capitalist to his enemies, a visionary investor to his allies. His firm was known for aggressive, often hostile, takeovers of undervalued or poorly managed tech companies. They were also Blackwood Innovations' most feared competitor. "Sterling," Jessica said, her voice a mix of shock and admiration. "Kat, what are you planning?" "Damien thinks the company is his greatest strength," Catherine said, walking towards the elevator, her duffel bag in hand. "He's about to find out that it's his greatest vulnerability. And I know where all the cracks are. After all, I'm the one who papered over them." She ended the call, stepped into the elevator, and descended from the glass tower for the last time. As the door slid shut, She caught her reflection in the polished steel. The woman staring back at her was not the broken wife of Damien Blackwood. It was Catherine Vance, and she was ready to reclaim everything he had taken from her, and more. The shattering was over. The reconstruction was about to begin. The Carlisle Hotel, with its old-world elegance and discreet service, was a world away from the cold modernity of Damien's penthouse. It was a fortress of quiet luxury, the perfect staging ground for what was to come. Catherine's suite, registered under the name Vance, was opulent but comforting, with heavy silk curtains and classic furniture that seemed to absorb the sounds and chaos of the city outside. She didn't sleep. Fueled by adrenaline and 2 decades of suppressed ambition, she worked through the night. Her laptop was open, the encrypted hard drive connected. On the screen were the unvarnished truths of Blackwood Innovations, not the polished PR-spun versions presented to shareholders, but the raw data, suppressed R&D failures, over-leveraged acquisitions, and most damningly, a series of creative accounting practices Damien had insisted upon to inflate their quarterly earnings. Catherine had argued against them, warning that they were a house of cards. Now she was grateful for his arrogance. He had handed her the very wind she needed to blow it all down. Beside the laptop lay her leather-bound journal. She methodically cross-referenced her handwritten notes, strategic plans, market analysis, software architecture ideas, with the company's official development roadmaps. The evidence was irrefutable. Dozens of key innovations, patents and strategic partnerships that Damien had publicly claimed as his own vision had originated in detail from her private notes. She had been the ghost in his machine, the architect of his throne. At 7 a.m. Jessica arrived, looking sharp and alert in a navy blue suit. She carried a briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Catherine, her eyes scanning her friend's face. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed. "Sleep is a luxury for peacetime, Jess," Catherine replied, taking a sip of the coffee. "Did you make the call?" Jessica nodded, setting her briefcase on the mahogany desk. "It wasn't easy. Alexander Sterling's schedule is locked down tighter than Fort Knox, but the name Vance, coupled with urgent, time-sensitive intelligence on Blackwood Innovations, got his attention. He's cleared his calendar. We have a meeting at his office, 10 a.m. sharp." "Good," Catherine said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "That gives us time to prepare the presentation." "Kat, are you sure about this?" Jessica asked, her professional caution warring with her personal loyalty. "Going to Sterling. It's like handing a starving wolf the keys to the henhouse. Once you let him in, you can't control what he does." "I'm not looking for control, Jess. I'm looking for a wrecking ball," Catherine stated coldly. "Damien respects only one thing: power, financial power. I'm going to bring a power to his door, so overwhelming that he'll have no choice but to bow. Alexander Sterling is not a partner. He is a weapon." She turned the laptop screen towards Jessica. For the next 2 hours, Catherine walked her friend through the vulnerabilities of Blackwood Innovations. She spoke with a passion and authority Jessica hadn't seen in years. This was the Catherine from Wharton, the brilliant strategist who could dissect a balance sheet like a surgeon. She explained how Damien's aggressive push into volatile markets had left the company dangerously exposed, how the inflated profit margins were hiding a growing debt crisis, and how their most recent flagship product, the Prometheus AI, was built on a flawed and unstable code base, a shortcut Damien had demanded against her explicit advice. "He's running a multi-billion-dollar company like a gambler on a hot streak," Catherine concluded, her voice steely. "But the streak is about to end, and I have the data to prove it." At 9:30 a.m. they left the Carlisle. Catherine wore the same black power suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. The faint bruise on her cheek was visible, unconcealed by makeup. It was not a mark of shame. It was a testament, a piece of evidence. Sterling Capital was located in a sleek, imposing skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, a steel and glass needle aimed at the heavens. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all polished granite and hushed reverence. They were escorted to the top floor, to Alexander Sterling's private office. The man himself was waiting. Alexander Sterling was in his late 40s, with silvering temples and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was the antithesis of Damien. Where Damien was loud, Sterling was quiet. Where Damien wore his wealth like a costume, Sterling wore his bespoke suit with an air of complete, unstudied indifference. He radiated a calm, predatory confidence that was far more intimidating than Damien's bluster. He did not smile as they entered. He simply watched, his sharp gaze missing nothing. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a low baritone. He gestured to the chairs opposite his vast, uncluttered desk. "Your lawyer's message was intriguing." His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second to the mark on her cheek, but his expression remained impassive. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. I believe I have information that will be of significant value to you and your firm." She didn't wait for permission. She placed her laptop on the desk, opened it, and began. She didn't speak of her marriage, of the gala, of the slap. She spoke the language he understood, numbers, data, and strategy. She laid bare the weaknesses of Blackwood Innovations with clinical precision. She presented the inflated earnings reports next to the real, grim figures from her hard drive. She detailed the structural flaws in the Prometheus AI, predicting a catastrophic failure within the next 6 months that would trigger a massive stock devaluation. Finally, she brought up her masterstroke. Damien is currently in final negotiations to acquire a smaller AI firm, Cygnus AI, for $2 billion, she explained, displaying the confidential deal memo she had downloaded. He sees it as a vanity project, but my analysis shows that Cygnus AI's patent portfolio, when combined with Blackwood's existing infrastructure, doesn't create synergy. It creates a redundancy that will cost $500 million in restructuring alone. He is paying a premium for a company whose core technology will be obsolete within 18 months. He is hemorrhaging capital for ego. Alexander Sterling leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled. He had not interrupted her once. He had simply listened, his sharp eyes following every chart, every projection. The silence in the room was absolute. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, the single word carrying more weight than a dozen compliments. "You're suggesting Blackwood is a house of cards." "I'm stating it as a fact," Catherine corrected him gently. "And I'm offering you the opportunity to be the one holding the fan when it comes time to blow." Sterling leaned back in his chair, his gaze analytical, searching. "Why come to me? You're his wife. A messy divorce. You could take him for half. Why burn the whole kingdom down?" For the first time, Catherine allowed a flicker of personal history to enter her voice. "Because I helped build that kingdom, Mr. Sterling, and my name is not on a single brick. Damien Blackwood believes he is the sole architect. He has forgotten the importance of a strong foundation. I am not here for alimony. I'm not here for a settlement." She paused, letting her words hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. "I am here for equity. I will provide you with the blueprint to acquire his company at a fraction of its current market value. In return, when Sterling Capital takes control, I want a senior executive position, a seat on the new board, and a significant stake in the restructured company. I am not selling my revenge, Mr. Sterling. I am leveraging my intellectual property." Alexander Sterling looked at her, and for the first time, a slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing a fellow hunter. He wasn't looking at a scorned wife. He was looking at his next, and perhaps most brilliant, business partner. "Miss Vance," he said, extending a hand across the desk. "I believe we have a deal." Damien Blackwood arrived at the headquarters of Blackwood Innovations at 9 a.m., feeling triumphant. The night had been a blur of champagne and fawning admirers after Catherine's dramatic exit. Serafina had been suitably impressed by his show of strength, and her flattery had soothed his bruised ego. He'd woken up that morning with a mild hangover and a sense of righteous indignation. Catherine's disobedience had been a public embarrassment, but he had handled it. He had put her in her place. He expected she was holed up in some hotel, crying, ready to come crawling back with a tearful apology. He'd make her sweat for a day or two before graciously allowing her to return. He strode through the gleaming lobby, nodding curtly at the employees who scurried out of his way. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood," they'd murmur. He was the king in his castle, the master of his universe. His executive assistant, a perpetually nervous young woman named Clara, met him at his office door. "Good morning, sir. The board members are assembling for the 10 a.m. emergency meeting you called." "Excellent," Damien said, tossing his coat onto a chair. He'd called the meeting to fast-track the Cygnus AI acquisition, a move that would splash his face across every business journal. It was the perfect way to bury the gossip from last night's gala under a headline of corporate conquest. "Any messages?" "Your wife's lawyer called, sir. Jessica Riley," Clara said, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "She said to inform you that Mrs. Blackwood, that Ms. Vance, would be attending the board meeting." Damien laughed, a short, sharp bark. "What? Is she coming to apologize in front of the board? A little dramatic, even for her." He dismissed the thought. She was probably bluffing, trying to rattle him. Fine, let her come. It will be educational for her. At precisely 10 a.m., Damien entered the boardroom on the 50th floor. The room was designed to intimidate, with a long, black granite table and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. His board was assembled, a collection of stern, grey-haired men he'd carefully selected for their pliability. Marcus Thorne, the COO, sat among them, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't meet Damien's eye. "Good morning, gentlemen," Damien began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I've called you here today to finalize our acquisition of—" The boardroom doors swung open. Damien stopped mid-sentence, an annoyed frown forming on his face. And then he saw her. Catherine stood in the doorway. She was not the woman he had slapped last night. This was a different person entirely. Dressed in her severe black suit, her face composed and resolute, she radiated an aura of unshakable power. The bruise on her cheek was a stark, silent accusation. But she was not alone. Behind her stood Alexander Sterling. A wave of confusion and alarm rippled through the boardroom. Alexander Sterling was their rival, their boogeyman, the shark that circled their waters. His presence here was inexplicable, a violation of the natural order. "Catherine?" Damien stammered, his bravado vanishing in a puff of smoke. "What is this? What is he doing here?" "Good morning, Damien." "Gentlemen," Catherine said, her voice clear and steady as she walked into the room. She didn't take a seat. Instead, she stood at the opposite end of the table, commanding the room's attention. Alexander Sterling stood slightly behind her, a silent, imposing presence. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am here today not as your wife, Damien, but as a representative of a new business proposal. Mr. Sterling is here as my associate." Damien gaped at her. "Business proposal? What are you talking about? This is a private board meeting." "It's about to become a very public one if you don't listen," Catherine said calmly. She nodded to Jessica Riley, who had followed them in, and began handing a thick, bound document to each board member. "Please take a look at the portfolio in front of you. It's an offer from Sterling Capital." The board members, their faces a mixture of confusion and intrigue, began to flip through the pages. A stunned silence descended upon the room, broken only by the rustle of paper. Damien stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. "An offer? An offer for what? This is absurd. Security, get them out of here." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Blackwood," Alexander Sterling spoke for the first time, his voice dangerously soft. "Because the document your board is currently reading is a preliminary, but very generous, tender offer to acquire a controlling interest in Blackwood Innovations." The blood drained from Damien's face. "Acquire? You can't. Our stock is at an all-time high. Our valuation is a fantasy," Catherine cut in, her voice sharp as a razor. "And that is why I am here." For the next 20 minutes, Catherine systematically and dispassionately dismantled the company she had helped build. She projected charts and figures onto the room's main screen from her laptop. She exposed the creative accounting, the hidden debt, the precarious market position. She walked them through the technical flaws of the Prometheus AI, predicting its inevitable and costly failure. Her delivery was flawless, her command of the facts absolute. The board members stared, mesmerized and horrified, as the woman they had only ever known as the CEO's quiet, pretty wife revealed herself to be the true master of their company's universe. "And finally," Catherine said, her gaze locking onto Damien's, "the Cygnus AI acquisition." She displayed the internal memo on the screen. "A $2 billion vanity project that will indebt this company for a decade to acquire redundant technology. An act of such profound fiscal irresponsibility that it borders on corporate malfeasance." Robert Chen, the investor who had been present at the gala, looked up from the portfolio, his face grim. "The offer from Sterling Capital is 30% above current market value. Given the irregularities Ms. Vance has just presented, this isn't just a generous offer. It's a lifeline." "This is ridiculous," Damien roared, slamming his fist on the table. "She's a liar, a bitter, scorned woman trying to destroy me." He turned on Catherine. "You did this? To get back at me for last night?" Catherine looked him dead in the eye. The entire room held its breath. "Last night was not the reason, Damien," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "It was merely the permission slip I gave myself to do what was necessary. You built this company on my intellect, my strategies and my work. And when you were done, you decided I was disposable." She gestured to the board. "I am simply demonstrating my value. The value you forgot." She turned back to the stunned board members. "Gentlemen, Sterling Capital's offer is on the table for the next 48 hours. It is conditional on the immediate removal of Damien Blackwood as CEO and the cessation of the Cygnus AI acquisition. Should you accept, I will be overseeing the transition as part of the new management team. I know where the bodies are buried. I also know where the treasure is." She closed her laptop. The presentation was over. Damien stood, shaking with a rage that rendered him speechless. He looked at the faces of his board, men he thought he owned, and saw not loyalty, but cold, hard calculation. He saw them looking from his trembling form to Catherine's steel composure, and he knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that he had already lost. Catherine and Alexander Sterling turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a bomb of their own making to detonate behind them. The fallout from the boardroom blitz was swift and brutal. Damien's world, once an impenetrable fortress of wealth and power, began to crumble with terrifying speed. He stormed out of the boardroom after Catherine and Sterling, his mind a maelstrom of fury and disbelief. He tried to rally his board, appealing to their loyalty, to their shared history, but it was useless. He was no longer speaking to friends. He was speaking to businessmen who had just been shown a lifeboat as their ship was taking on water. "Damien, be reasonable," Robert Chen had told him, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The woman just proved with data that our stock is overvalued by at least 40%. Sterling is offering a premium on that inflated price. If we refuse, and this information leaks, which it inevitably will, we'll be facing shareholder lawsuits that will tie us up in court for years. She's checkmated you." His first frantic call was to Serafina. He needed her comfort, her validation, her adoration. He found her at her apartment, surrounded by packed Louis Vuitton luggage. "What's all this?" he demanded, his voice strained. "Are you going somewhere?" Serafina didn't look up from a box of jewelry she was sorting. "I'm going to Milan for a few weeks. A new contract," she said, her tone cool and distant. "Milan? Now? I need you here," he exclaimed. "Catherine, she's trying to destroy me. She went to Alexander Sterling." Serafina finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I heard. It's all over the financial news feeds already. Sterling Capital launches hostile takeover bid for Blackwood Innovations." She shrugged, a delicate, dismissive gesture. "It sounds messy." "Messy? It's a war. And I need you by my side. We're a power couple, remember?" A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Damien, darling," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We were a power couple when you had power. I attached myself to a rising star, not a falling one. A CEO in the middle of a hostile takeover, with his brilliant wife leading the charge against him. That's not a good look. It's embarrassing." The word hit him harder than the slap he'd delivered to Catherine. Embarrassing. That's what he was to her now. He realized with sickening clarity that he had never been more than a stepping stone, a means to an end. Her affection had been a transaction, and his value had just plummeted. "So that's it? You're just leaving?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Don't be so dramatic," she said, snapping the jewelry box shut. "Think of it as a strategic retreat. Call me when you've sorted out all of this." She brushed past him, her expensive perfume a final, cloying insult. He knew she would never answer his call. The rat was leaving the sinking ship. His next blow came from within his own company. He tried to lock down the company's servers, to hide the evidence Catherine had presented, but it was too late. He received a call from Marcus Thorne. "Marcus, I need you to initiate a digital lockdown. Erase the R&D logs from the last 6 months. Shred the quarterly variance reports." "I can't do that, Damien." Marcus's voice was firm, laced with a new kind of confidence. "What do you mean you can't? I'm still the CEO of this company. You work for me." "No, Damien, I work for the company, for the shareholders. And right now, the best thing for this company is a smooth transition of power," Marcus said. There was a pause. "I've already provided Ms. Vance and Mr. Sterling's legal team with the supplementary data they requested. The server logs, the internal emails, all of it. It corroborates her entire presentation." The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that Damien couldn't even speak. Marcus, his loyal COO, the man he'd promoted and trusted for years, had turned on him. "Why, Marcus? he finally whispered. Because she was right, Marcus said simply. About everything. About the flawed code, about the Cygnus deal, about you. You stopped listening a long time ago, Damien. You were going to run this company into the ground out of sheer ego. Catherine, Ms. Vance, she's saving it, and all of our jobs along with it. I'm sorry, but my loyalty is to the house she built, not to the man who was trying to burn it down. The final nail in his coffin was the media. The story was too juicy to ignore. Billionaire CEO's wife teams with rival to seize control of empire, screamed the headlines. They painted Catherine as a wronged genius, a strategic mastermind reclaiming her legacy. They dug into her past, her academic achievements at Wharton, her early, uncredited role in the company's founding. She became a feminist icon overnight. Damien, in contrast, was portrayed as a fool and a brutish tyrant, the man who slapped his wife and lost his empire in the same week. The photo of Catherine leaving the gala, her face resolute, was plastered everywhere. The faint bruise was a symbol of his downfall. He holed up in his penthouse, the glass walls that had once felt like a symbol of his dominance, now feeling like a cage. He watched the stock ticker for Blackwood Innovations. The board, facing overwhelming pressure, had publicly announced they were entering into negotiations with Sterling Capital. The stock price, after a brief, panicked dip, had soared on the news of the acquisition and the promise of new, competent leadership. He was undone, utterly and completely. He had underestimated the woman who stood beside him for 10 years. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her grace for weakness. He had thought she was an accessory, a beautiful object to be displayed and, when necessary, disciplined. He never realized she was the queen, and he had just been a pawn in her long, patient game. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the final, crushing silence of defeat. The 48 hours that followed the boardroom meeting were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and high-stakes negotiations, but the outcome was never in doubt. With Marcus Thorne's cooperation and the irrefutable data Catherine had provided, the board of Blackwood Innovations had no choice. They voted unanimously to accept Sterling Capital's offer. Damien Blackwood was officially and ignominiously terminated as CEO, forced to sell his shares as part of the deal. He was given a severance package dictated by the ironclad prenuptial agreement Catherine had insisted upon years ago, an agreement he had laughed at the time. It protected all premarital assets and intellectual property. As she was the source of nearly all the company's foundational IP, he was left with a fraction of the fortune he once commanded. He was still a rich man, but he was no longer a king. He was just another wealthy, forgotten casualty of Wall Street. The day the deal was finalized, Catherine walked back into the headquarters of the company she had built, not as the CEO's wife, but as the new chief strategy officer and a member of the board of directors for the newly formed entity, Sterling Blackwood. The atmosphere was electric. Employees who had once averted their eyes from her now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. She was no longer a phantom in the hallways. She was the acknowledged power. Her first act was to call a company-wide town hall meeting. Standing on a stage in the building's atrium, she looked out at the hundreds of faces staring up at her. She didn't gloat. She didn't mention Damien's name. She spoke of the future. For too long, this company has chased short-term gains and fleeting headlines, she began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. We have prioritized image over innovation, ego over excellence. That era is over. Starting today, we are returning to the principles that once made us great: sustainable growth, fearless research, and a commitment to building technology that lasts. She laid out her vision, a clear, concise, and brilliant roadmap for the company's next 5 years. She announced the immediate cancellation of the disastrous Cygnus AI acquisition, redirecting the funds into internal R&D and promoting several talented engineers whom Damien had overlooked. She answered questions from the floor with a depth of knowledge and a clarity of purpose that left no one in doubt as to who was now in charge. Marcus Thorne, who she had promoted to president and COO, stood by her side, a look of profound respect on his face. Later that day, she met with Alexander Sterling in her new office, the very office Damien had once occupied. It was already being transformed. The cold, minimalist furniture was being replaced with warmer, more functional pieces. The ostentatious modern art was gone, replaced with whiteboards covered in strategic diagrams. "A good first day, Miss Vance," Alexander said, leaning against the doorframe, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Please call me Catherine," she replied, looking up from a budget report. "Catherine," he acknowledged with a small smile. "The markets have responded well. The analysts are calling this the most elegant corporate takeover in a decade." "It wasn't about elegance," she said, her expression serious. "It was about correction, restoring balance." "Perhaps," he conceded, "but you can't deny there's a certain poetry to it." He looked at her, his usual predatory gaze softened by something else. Admiration. "I've acquired dozens of companies in my career. It's usually a bloody, messy affair. But with you, it was like watching a surgeon at work. You didn't use a cudgel, you used a scalpel." "Damien was the architect of his own downfall," Catherine said, unwilling to take full credit for his self-destruction. "I simply pointed out the structural flaws to the demolition team." Alexander chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. "A modest surgeon, then. I have a feeling this is going to be a very profitable partnership, Catherine." Their relationship remained strictly professional, yet a powerful current of mutual respect flowed between them. He valued her intellect, her foresight, her unwavering composure. She valued his decisiveness, his vast resources, and the fact that he never once underestimated her. He didn't see a woman. He saw a brilliant mind, a formidable ally. For Catherine, after a decade of being treated as an accessory, that respect was more valuable than any romance. That evening, she did not return to a hotel suite. She had purchased a beautiful brownstone in the West Village, a place with character and warmth, filled with books and art that she loved. It was hers, bought with the first payment from her new, staggering salary and signing bonus. As she unlocked her own front door, carrying a bag of groceries, a sense of profound peace washed over her. She wasn't just reclaiming her company, she was reclaiming her life, her name, her identity. The gilded cage was gone, its bars melted down and reforged into a key. The new dawn wasn't just for Sterling Blackwood. It was for Catherine Vance. And it was just beginning. 6 months passed. The transition at Sterling Blackwood was not just smooth, it was transformative. Under Catherine's strategic guidance and Marcus's operational management, the company flourished. She dismantled Damien's reckless projects, stabilized the company's finances, and fostered a new culture of genuine innovation. The flawed Prometheus AI was scrapped, and a new, more stable and powerful version, codenamed Phoenix, was already in development. Built on the solid foundation of her original architectural plans, the company's stock price didn't just recover, it reached unprecedented new heights. Catherine Vance became a legend in the business world. She was the subject of a glowing cover story in Forbes magazine titled "The Architect: How Catherine Vance Rebuilt Her Empire." The article detailed her quiet but crucial role in the founding of Blackwood Innovations and her masterful strategy in seizing control. The accompanying photograph was of her in the new boardroom, poised and powerful, with Alexander Sterling looking on with clear admiration. She was no longer defined by her relationship with Damien. He was now a footnote in her story. Her relationship with Alexander had deepened into a formidable professional partnership and a quiet, budding friendship. They were intellectual equals who challenged and respected one another. There were hints of something more, shared dinners that lasted for hours, conversations that strayed from business to art, philosophy, and their pasts. But they were in no rush. For the first time in a long time, Catherine was building something for herself, on her own terms, and she was savoring every moment. One crisp autumn afternoon, Damien Blackwood sat alone at an outdoor cafe in a quiet, forgotten corner of Soho. His world had shrunk dramatically. The sycophants and hangers-on had vanished along with his CEO title. His invitations to galas and exclusive parties had dried up. He was a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the very events he once dominated. Serafina had never called. He'd seen her once, photographed on the arm of a much older, much richer European industrialist. She hadn't even given him a second glance. He was scrolling through the news on his phone when he saw it. The cover of Forbes. He stared at the image of Catherine, his Catherine, looking more regal and confident than he had ever seen her. He read the headline, "The Architect." The word twisted in his gut. He read excerpts from the article, quotes from Marcus Thorne praising her vision, from industry analysts lauding her genius, from Alexander Sterling calling her his most valuable asset. There was a small, bitter paragraph about him, describing him as the ousted founder whose aggressive but reckless leadership had nearly ruined the company. He was the villain in her heroic tale. As he sat there, a wave of cold, hard clarity washed over him. He had never truly seen her. He had seen a wife, an assistant, a reflection of his own success. He had never seen the brilliant, formidable woman who had been standing beside him all along, holding up the pillars of his kingdom. The slap had not been a show of strength. It had been an act of catastrophic weakness, the desperate lashing out of an insecure man terrified of the power his wife quietly wielded. He looked up from his phone just as a black town car pulled up to the curb across the street. The rear door opened, and Catherine stepped out, followed by Alexander Sterling. They were laughing about something, their heads close together. They were heading into a renowned art gallery. She looked radiant, energized, free. She didn't see him. He was invisible to her now, a ghost from a past life she had shed completely. He watched as Alexander held the gallery door open for her, the gesture one of casual, genuine respect. As she passed through the doorway, she turned and gave him a smile, not the practiced, polite smile she had worn for a decade as Mrs. Blackwood, but a real, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. Damien felt a profound, aching emptiness that had nothing to do with money or status. It was the realization of what he had truly lost. He hadn't just lost a company. He had thrown away the one person who had seen greatness in him and had dedicated her own genius to making it a reality. He had shattered the most valuable thing he ever had, not with a single slap, but with 1,000 cuts of ego and neglect. He was left with his diminished fortune and his cavernous, empty penthouse. She had the company, the respect of her peers, and a future she was building for herself. The final reckoning was not a dramatic confrontation or a shouted argument. It was this, a quiet, undeniable truth settling upon him in a lonely cafe. He had slapped his wife to please his mistress, and the next day she had arrived with an army and calmly, methodically, taken back the world she had built, and he had no one to blame but himself. And so, Catherine Vance's story becomes a powerful lesson in value, respect, and the quiet strength that so many people underestimate. It's a reminder that the silent partner in the room is often the most powerful, and that true strength isn't about raising your voice or your hand, but about knowing your worth and having the courage to claim it. Damian Blackwood thought he was breaking his wife, but he only succeeded in breaking the chains that held back a titan. She didn't seek simple revenge. She sought reclamation, building a brighter future from the ashes of a painful past. What did you think of Catherine's incredible transformation? Was her boardroom takeover the ultimate power move? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of resilience and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And of course, for more compelling stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thank you for listening.